No one expected that in the midst of a downpour, this night would forever change the course of history. On the night of the 18th of August, 1818, an unprecedented storm broke out over the boundless steppes of Ningxia. Streaks of lightning tore through the night sky, and the wind moaned like an ancient song of a forgotten tribe. Inside the vast imperial yurt lay the great conqueror, Yacía Sobresabanas de Seda, aged and worn by countless battles, breathing unevenly, with blood spreading from a wound like a dark ribbon bearing the omen of death. Before him stood the 16-year-old Tangut princess, Gurbel el Jin Katun, a bloody dagger in her hand. She had resolved to end the long years of her people's slavery and avenge her family, who had suffered under his conquest policies. No cries were heard, only the continuous roar of the storm and the sound of dripping blood on expensive Persian carpets. This man, who once extended his dominion from the Mongolian plains to distant Eurasia, was at that moment not a formidable commander, but a fragile old man slowly fading in silence under the calm, piercing gaze of the girl who realized that the fate of her people had been sealed. To understand how this story unfolded, one must return to the majestic Mongolian steppes of 1162, where a boy named Temujin was born. His father, Yasuge, led a relatively small tribe constantly subjected to raids by neighbors and hostile clans for whom violence was an everyday norm. At the age of 9, Temujin witnessed the treacherous poisoning of his father during a diplomatic dinner, after which the family was exiled and doomed to wander the snowy expanses, surviving only on cheap roots and rodents. However, the key event was his youth. In 1194, when he celebrated his 22nd birthday and had just married Borti, a hostile Merkits clan attacked his camp, not for cattle or weapons, but to avenge an insult to their leader's mother. They took Borte away, and he, rushing after them, could only hear her sinister screams fading into the night. For 8 months, Temujin lived in ignorance, tormented by bitter anticipation and planning ruthless revenge. When he finally recovered his wife, it turned out she was expecting a child, the son, Jochi, who bore doubts about his origin and inherited the shadow of these events for life. This experience awakened, in the future, Genghis Khan, not only a desire for conquest, but also a terrifying cruelty. After the defeat of the Merkits, he ordered their women to be distributed among the warriors, not as wives, but as living trophies, instituting a ranking system where unmarried women were considered the most valuable. Each of them was marked with a number on the neck, and commanders had the right to choose the best first, from 30 to 50 for the ruler's personal yurt. Over time, his harem grew to about 7,000 women of various ethnicities: Chinese, Persian, Russian, Arab, Tangut, becoming a grim symbol of the scale of his imperial ambitions. If you appreciate such calm tales of history, please subscribe to the channel. It's free and helps me continue. 7,000 captive women of different peoples became a living mosaic of conquests, and behind this number lay a system of unspeakable horror. Over time, Genghis Khan had 7,000 women from conquered peoples: Chinese from the Jin dynasty, Persians, Russians, Arabs, Tanguts, from Xia, and each ethnic group lived in a separate sector of the imperial camp, like a living atlas of imperial borders. However, the superficial shine of this collection concealed a far more sinister design. In the year 1112, during the conquest of Jin, Genghis Khan perfected the method of genetic subjugation. Cruelty alone was no longer enough. It was necessary to erase the enemy's bloodlines through the maternal womb. He ordered his soldiers to systematically rape captive women and force them to bear children who, by paternal blood, became Mongols, regardless of the mother's origin. He himself called this method genocide through the womb and turned it into a machine of conquest. To give the practice scale and precision, Genghis Khan established yam stations every 30 kilometers along the empire's main roads. Officially, they served to collect and transmit messages, but secretly, each held from 20 to 50 women to serve the passing military detachments. After 3 months, the resources were rotated. Surviving women were replaced with new captives from fresh campaigns, and those who died or were exhausted were written off and replacements delivered. Bureaucrats kept detailed records: origin, age, number of services, and causes of death. The official secretary of Tangut, Origin, Yaluchu Kai, in his records from 1220 to 1227, noted that more than 300,000 women passed through the yams, most of whom did not survive a year. Pregnant women were sent to special maternity camps, where their children, boys and girls, received different futures. The former were taken into military service from the age of 5. The latter returned to the system upon reaching 12, thus closing the perfect circle of terror. Genghis Khan himself established strict protocols. Virgins from noble families were taken for the first week after the city's capture, then transferred to generals, then to ordinary soldiers, and finally to servants, carrying out gradual humiliation, aimed not only at destroying bodies, but also breaking spirits. Many women committed suicide, unable to bear the shame. Others despaired and lost their minds, and among those who survived, only the most adaptable became overseers of the same yams, turning victims into accomplices. In 1219, when Samarkand was stormed, this mechanism revealed itself in its full horrific system. After a 5-month siege, Genghis Khan ordered 30,000 women aged from 8 to 80 to be gathered in the main square, divided by age and usefulness. 3,000 young beauties were awarded to the bravest soldiers. 10,000 married women were distributed among regular units, and the elderly and very young girls were shot as useless material. For 3 days and 3 nights, screams did not cease in Samarkand, and Persian chroniclers wrote that the Zarafshan River was stained crimson, not only from blood, but also from desperate women throwing themselves from bridges. For 3 days and 3 nights, cries did not cease in Samarkand, and Persian chroniclers wrote that the Zarafshan River was stained crimson, not only from blood, but also from the desperate leaps of women from the bridges. The most terrifying aspect of this cruelty was not so much the amount of violence as its meticulously planned organization. The army's medical staff examined the captives, sorting them by health and reproductive ability, and genealogical records were kept as scrupulously as records of the most valuable trophies. Later, European and Chinese historians noted that this very womb genocide ensured the demographic and genetic dominance of the Mongols in Central Asia, and modern genetic studies confirm the widespread distribution of descendants of this bloody experiment throughout the Eurasian space. The cruelty knew no bounds even for those who proclaimed their power over the world. The Imperial Army's medics carefully examined the women, sorting them by health and fertility indicators. For in the thousands of steppe camps of Genghis Khan, reproduction played the role of state strategy. It replenished the ranks of the troops and strengthened control over the subjugated peoples. Scribes recorded every distribution by name, age, and origin, and guards vigilantly ensured that no woman left without a mark in the conqueror's tally book. In those rare cases when someone dared to resist, the revenge was swift and merciless. They were executed on the spot, and the system was immediately replenished so that no attempt at resistance could crack the iron discipline. Genghis Khan himself personally supervised the most important selections. Legend said he could unmistakably recognize the original tribe by the smell of the skin and checked virginity with just a glance at posture. However, the key trial was the campaign against the Tanguts in 1226. The Tangut kingdom of Xia, once a wavering ally, refused to send troops against Khwarezm and thus betrayed the treaty in the face of a common enemy. Genghis Khan took this as a personal insult and led his army in a merciless offensive, intending to wipe the Tanguts off the face of the earth. He ordered the fortresses destroyed, the men exterminated, and every woman taken into slavery, and the harem. During the siege of the Tangut capital, the emperor offered surrender on one condition. He would give his 13-year-old daughter, Gurbel el Jin Katun, as a lawful wife to Genghis Khan. Such an honor the Mongol Khan almost never granted to the defeated. Usually, they became only slaves. But this time, he agreed. The girl was remarkably resilient. Despite fear and youth, she never lowered her gaze even before the harshest garrison. For 3 years, she lived in the Khan's private quarters, not mingling with the other concubines, and every day carefully studied his habits. She knew that after drinking kumis, he fell into a long, deep sleep, that the guards left during thunderstorms to reinforce the tents, and that they did not inspect her clothes before rest. Outwardly, Gurbel el Jin Katun was the perfect obedient wife. She never shouted or begged, nor shed tears in the tyrant's sight. But every day before falling asleep, she touched the tiny dagger hidden in the jade comb's handle, the last gift from her mother, folded in her memory. But every day before falling asleep, she touched the tiny jade dagger hidden in the hilt of a comb, the last gift from her mother, kept in her memory. On the night of the 18th of August, 1827, a thunderstorm swept over the camp. The wind tore at the tents, the guards rushed to save their belongings, and the Khan, celebrating yet another victory over the besieged city, drank too much kumis. When Gurbel el Jin Katun helped him undress and laid him in bed, she allowed him to enjoy the illusion of a usual ritual. At the moment, the Khan lowered his head and closed his eyes. His hand touched her shoulder, and under the cover of thunder and lightning, the princess drew the dagger and with one precise movement cut off what had always been the instrument of his power and violence. Genghis Khan made no sound, not even a gasp. The blade worked with surgical precision, and the Mongol ruler, stunned, saw in the stream of blood his own helplessness and the one who was no longer a child, but a true worthy adversary. He tried to call for help, but the sound of thunder drowned out everything around, and the staff of power slipped from his hands. Gurbel el Jin Katun retreated to the corner of the tent, sat down, and without a trace of fear, watched as the centuries-old foundations of the merciless empire crumbled, not attempting to flee, because a world where she could be free no longer existed on its map. Imagine how the mighty ruler, who had conquered half a continent, died unarmed, powerless. She sat in the corner, holding in her trembling hand the dagger with which she had taken the life of the great Khan. In those dark hours, servants diligently pressed sheets to the wounds, but they became increasingly soaked with blood, while Gurbel el Jin herself, a Tangut by origin and prisoner of his harem, silently wiped the blade on the edge of her clothing. Time stretched into infinity. Genghis Khan, wounded by internal bleeding, desperately addressed her in Mongolian, Khitan, and Tangut languages, promising riches, boundless power, and forgiveness for himself and for the thousands of women of his conquered tribes. But only the steady beat of a heart answered him, like the echo of hundreds of years of violence and humiliation. When the first convulsions gripped his body and his lips twisted in pain, Gurbel el Jin raised her voice in Tangut, the native language of her ancestors. This is for all of us. At dawn, the guards who entered the chambers found Genghis Khan dead in a pool of his own blood. Gurbel el Jin herself, according to reports, smiled calmly and offered no resistance at her arrest. The Mongol commanders faced an impossible choice: the true cause of death, Castration and death from blood loss at the hands of an 18-year-old captive would destroy the myth of the invincible Khan, and the empire built on fear and sexual terror could not allow such disgrace. Therefore, they fabricated legends of a battle wound, a fall from a horse, or a sudden illness, anything but the truth. Gurbel Jin was secretly executed without trial or witnesses, her name erased from all chronicles, but the whispers of court guards, servants, and former captives carried the truth across the boundless steppes faster than any official historian's fabrications. The death of Genghis Khan did not end the system of violence, but for the first time shattered the invincibility of the legend. If one young Tangut woman could end the life of the ruler, then what was impossible? In the imperial arenas, women began to whisper the forgotten name, Gurbel Jin, not as the name of a victim, but as the name of vengeance and hope, proof that even the cruelest regime could be overthrown by one skillfully aimed knife and several years of patience. In the imperial arenas, women began whispering a forgotten name, Gurbel Jin, not as the name of a victim, but as a name of vengeance and hope, proof that even the most brutal regime can be overthrown by a single skillfully aimed knife and several years of patience. Modern genetic research complements this story with hard numbers. Approximately 0.5% of the male population of the Earth, about 16 million men, descend not from the official wives of Genghis Khan, but from 7,000 women of his personal harem and hundreds of thousands who passed through the system of violence, the largest genetic trace of a bloody crime in human history. And each such fragment of DNA is a silent witness to the violence that official history still romanticizes, mentioning only military tactics and the unification of the steppes, as if thousands of women were barely a footnote to the great strategy of conquest. Could it be that the history of the great conqueror concealed not only feats, but also an abyss of horror? This narrative revealed the truth about Genghis Khan, who was called a hero, but in reality deliberately turned women into objects of terror. In the stories that have reached us, 7,000 women were raped in the arena, 300,000 women were held in prison camps, and genocide through the womb was systematically used as one of the tactics of war. Yet in official reports, this appeared only as a dry statistic. But the people remembered. In surviving Tangut songs, in Persian poems that escaped censorship, and in lullabies, Chinese mothers sang to their daughters. Different lines sounded. Their Genghis Khan was not a hero, but someone to hide from. Temujin, raised in an atmosphere of cruelty and loss, turned his personal pain into widespread suffering of peoples. He mixed power with ownership, conquest with rape, and empire with a system of inhuman enslavement. He was not distinguished by brilliant military strategy. He possessed an army and a conscious ideology of violence. He did not unite the steppes, but consistently destroyed the lives of their inhabitants. Instead of building a state, he created the largest pre-modern network of human trafficking, where every abducted woman became a commodity and a means of control over conquered regions. And when in the year 1205 appeared Gurbel el Jin Katun, her name was attempted to be erased from the annals, but she was destined to show that even the cruelest tyrant can be pierced by the deadly blow of justice. This young Tangut girl, having survived the destruction of her family and the mass violent actions of Temujin's army, carried a plan of revenge for 3 long years, and finally, quietly but decisively, delivered a single cutting strike. Thus fell empires founded on fear in bedrooms, not with honor, but in sweat of blood and terror. While the storm of revenge subsided, the steppe wind once again brought the unchanging light of dawn over the plains. And although on other continents, in Bosnia, Rwanda, Congo, and Myanmar, the echo of Genghis Khan's system of field violence still sounded, his ghost first stole the peace of women thousands of kilometers from Mongolia. But along with him endured the memory of Gurbel el Jin Katun, in every brave woman who raises her voice in international tribunals, in every judicial verdict on sexual crimes. History has proven rapists can erect territories, but one woman with a knife and unwavering resolve is capable of destroying their power. As long as we remember those who rose up, whose names were almost erased, no tyrant will sleep peacefully. History does not forgive, history does not forget, and sometimes only it delivers justice.